Hello,
I should not be
everyone.
allowed to do eyeliner.
Okay, I'm gonna restart that. Actually, I'll just leave that in with that explanation.
Yeah, whatever.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Making the Rounds, back from the dead, Worlds Edition 2020. People thought that I wasn't going to do Worlds content this year, but I was just strategically waiting for the plans to finish so that people wouldn't ask me about them. Yes, nice.
Woo!
Because every year for content creators, there's this you cover NALCS and ULCS, right? Because that's what English speaking fans care about. And then suddenly there's a race to watch everything else and binge it as fast as possible when World starts. For so many people. Obviously, for me, I had it a lot easier because I would watch like LPL, LCK, and Emily's probably very similar. And so I would watch like the major regions, but then it was just like binge watching the wildcard regions, and that was just never rewarding. So, no offense, but it was just like
There were some fun bangers in there.
there are some like
Yeah.
good teams, right? For sure, but then you have to get through them playing against like really tragic teams sometimes. And then just the quality of the games is really, really coin flip. But sometimes it's good, sometimes it's a lot of fun. Sometimes you get to see standout players. But this year, I just decided not to do it at all. Like, and I don't know, my sleep was much more rewarding for that. So just I'm probably
Nice.
still not going to talk as much about UOL, Machi, and PSG as a preface, but just and based mostly what I saw from PSG and UOL on the plans. Anyway, you guys don't care about that at all.
No, not
So
at
we
all.
will instead talk about stuff that is more relevant to League of Legends fans, the World Championship group stage, right? So, in
Woo!
tradition to the show, what we'd like to do is we'd like to talk about teams making the next round. So, basically, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the groups and we're going to talk about kind of like win conditions for these teams and how they can pull through or like the likelihood of them doing so. Strategically, this avoids us making like really sweeping predictions, which I think every content creator secretly hates. Obviously, we will probably still like say, okay, in all likelihood, these teams make it out of the group, et cetera, based on my opinion. But we'll still talk about, if this team makes it out, this is what it's going to have to look like, right? To get us started, we're going to go ahead look into Group A. Just go alphabetically and be boring like that. Maybe I'll mix it up and do C next. Who cares? But we have G2, Machi Esports, Suning, and TL. I already prefaced saying I'm not going to talk much about Machi. So is there anything that you would say in particular about how you think their win condition is for getting out of this group?
I mean, I think from what I've seen, and again, like I'm not going to even pretend to be an expert because to your point, I did not watch their season. I talked to a few people that either work on the PCS broadcast or are just huge PCS fans and can't quit, like Xander. And it seems like, I mean, I guess as you kind of would on the team with Mission, they play through Mission. I think PK is. I mean, let me take a look at the top laners in this.
From what I remember of PK, that's very fitting
Look,
trail off right there.
look. We talked about this. Was it last year in the press room? Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Is PK versus Rocky? Was
Yeah,
that the matchup of the century?
that
Yeah,
was
okay.
the most exciting matchup I've ever experienced right there.
So I will say this. I'll say if Machi is going to make it out, they're going to want to try to play through jungle mid and slightly more of a bot lane focus, in my opinion, going up against some of the top laners in this group, especially because this is a really good meta for Impact. I think a lot of his favorable champions are either in meta or on the periphery of what we'd consider meta, so they're completely viable. Bin, I have a lot of question marks on, but I think he's like one of those really good like young talents that lacks experience. Obviously, there's a slight champ pool issue with him that we'll get to when we talk about him, but I still think he's a significantly stronger laner. And then Wonder, who had, in my opinion, a really fantastic summer season, and has always been good, but like just this summer, he has looked even better. So yeah, it's those are my like tentative win conditions for Machi, but I hope someone who watches a lot more PCS than I do and didn't just watch their finals is able to say more in the comments, hopefully, because I feel like I'm definitely not doing them justice.
Let's move on to the next teams then. I think this is kind of relevant because there are a lot of top-centric teams in this group, like Suning, G2 in particular. So what did you think of the Ornn meta and plans? Do you think it's going to be Ornn meta in group stage as well, or?
I am undecided because I think a lot of, I mean, I like talking to the play-in teams, even a lot of them were surprised at how the meta evolved and how it ended up being really slow. And a lot of them admitted, players from multiple teams, that a huge reason for that is because they're all bad. And I'm not like saying this to be mean. I'm saying this is what they literally said to me. They're like, we are not good. We're not as good as the teams that are in the main event. That's why we're in play-ins. When you're not a great team, you tend to slow down the game more. You tend to give yourself maybe better chances in like a late game 5v5 and play more towards scaling because you know that that is a little bit easy, quote unquote, like easier to execute than going full early game. I think that's another reason why we saw some pretty rough Lilia compositions and some pretty rough Lilia play until the slightly later on in the event. And even then, you could say the first two games I think she won, the PSG one and the Legacy one, they were both kind of in spite of the Lilia pick and not because of it. That's my opinion. You can feel free to disagree. So I think I'm actually really undecided because I want to see if teams continue to play as slowly as they did in play-ins, because when I look at a lot of the teams that qualified here, we have a lot of like jungle mid-centric teams, we have a lot of top focused teams, and they tend, in my opinion, to play faster overall. Now with this group specifically, Suning and Team Liquid are actually, in my opinion, like slower teams when compared to either other teams in their region or just other teams in this like main event in general. So I still think Ornn, like to go at the end of that incredibly rambling thing, I still think Ornn is going to be a really important pick. Also because even some of the faster teams like JDG Gaming, for example, JD Gaming, they're obviously going to prioritize Ornn because Zoom is like the best Ornn player in the world, and he can literally 1v9 a game on Ornn even if his team ints. So, I mean, other teams in the group should probably be banning Ornn. I think Ornn is still going to be, I mean, he fits into so many compositions that I think it will still be a focus. I think Suning is obviously going to focus Renekton for Bin, which is the biggest detractor when I have kind of tried to talk Bin up a bit is people are like, well, he can only play Renekton. And while I don't think that's true, I do think that he has a kind of a more narrow champ pool, and it could be a problem for Suning. I also think Suning, again, they play slower. G2 might be the fastest team in this group, actually.
Which is, I don't even think G2 are that fast.
No, they aren't. So it's kind of funny.
It is an interesting group for sure. I think if we're talking about like win conditions of teams, I think G2 is the team that plays like most. I would say this team plays the best around mid lane specifically of any team in the group. And some of the ways in which they do that are really interesting. Basically, like you see Perks and Mickey X inting, but it's almost like in the tradition of old IG, right? Which, rest in peace, where like every lane is volatile, right? Every lane is playing like super volatile to create pressure across the map. And this allows them to have like really sophisticated kind of macro where they're playing 3 lanes at once. So if the enemy team makes a group play on one side, then they immediately like make 2 side trades going for mid and top, for example, if it's on bot. And this they're able to do this by playing volatile everywhere and pushing up constantly. But the other side effect of this is that if Caps has prio, like Perks and Mickey X will play like Lunatic's bot lane because they know that Perks will like come late and get a double kill for them dying, right? Stuff like that I think is really interesting. I won't necessarily say that all of their inting is based off of, oh, we know if we play like psychopaths, then our mid laner will carry. But I do think like that's a big part of the philosophy behind it. I also think part of the reason why teams are playing slow, just to go back to that topic, is just a misunderstanding of lane matchups in general. Like you can't pressure the win conditions of the lane, then you're not going to be able to execute like team compositions off laning phase. Saw a lot of like really basic mistakes, like apparently Legacy's top laner is known for GP, but he didn't know that he should contest the first wave against Renekton. There was the Kate Morg of Supermassive didn't space properly against Leona when they played Mad Lions. Like stuff like that was just really questionable. But I think if you're making fundamental landing mistakes like that, then no, you're not going to be able to play like a faster game.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like G2, their win condition is basically going to be based on how much can we allow like these types of situations where we're able to play like multiple lanes and get the better trade, because they're going to constantly be playing for like tempo trades. So if they're giving up dragons, which they do, then they have to kind of avoid the sole point win condition of the other team and have a massive enough lead from the top side that the enemy team doesn't get like the third and fourth dragon, right? Because they're probably going to give up the first two, especially the Team Liquid, who love dragons. Look, you know,
I was gonna say, look, you know what, I was actually gonna bring that up next. I was like, well, we know who's gonna be taking those first two in this group. That's probably gonna be TL.
Yeah, so yeah, Team Liquid I think is just gonna probably get all the dragons they want, because Suning and G2 don't care about them that much. I don't know about Maji's philosophy on dragons personally, but of those three teams, I feel like TL is going to kind of uncontestedly get the first two dragons in many situations. And so based off of that, they're going to be able to kind of have to like play for soul win con, I think is a good strategy for them. If they can manage to do that and they RNG like a decent soul, I think Ocean Soul is personally kind of overhyped, but it really depends on your comp. If you outscale, then yeah, no shit, Ocean Soul is going to be really good for you. Or if enemy team has a lot of poke, then no shit, Ocean Soul is going to be really good for you, right? But Infernal Soul is busted. Mount Soul is really annoying. And then, you know, when Cloud Soul pops up, you don't care that much.
It exists.
But
it's there.
Yeah, I think for sure it's that's going to be an interesting one, because you would say Team Liquid are the slowest team, and Dragon WinCon is usually like a fast team type thing. My main concern for Team Liquid is again like the bot lane matchup stuff. I would say that Core JJ Tactical are one of the better laning bots in NA, but that's kind of a low bar. You still see them like not take very important trade windows, and luckily the like high level laning of G2 and Suning isn't really there either. So like Suning is way more we're gonna push really aggressively, and we're not gonna trade on the wave. We're not gonna slow push. We're gonna push pretty aggressively and then look for openings for Sword Art to roam, like that kind of team. So I think
I was gonna say Suning is more about like they push up their waves so that Sword Art can get out of lane, because they kind of leave Huanfeng to do whatever in a 1v2, and they put him on champions that he can obviously succeed with on that. But then also, this is all for Sophom, right? Like SFM needs to be able to do his insane push-up counter jungle thing, and that can work out really, really well. But I know you've also pointed this out several times. The way to beat Suning is while they are pushed up, since they don't always wear their flanks, you can come in and kind of collapse on them that way. But they love, like, this is a team that really loves to push both to unlock Sword Art, but then also because Suning, because SFM will go for these like super aggressive counter jungling to either it'll end up looking like genius, or it'll be like, why are you doing red buff while the rest of the team is dying? So
yeah, I think this is actually, like, the more I think about it, kind of a nice group for TL in general. Their situation, like, I think G2, a lot of people are counting G2 off, but I just think their macro game is just still the best in the world.
Wait, are they? I didn't know that.
Or what do you mean?
I put G2. I put G2 at like full disclosure.
I've seen people
we're not going to get into.
I've seen people put Suning or TL above them just because they think that G2 looks like really shaky or had a shaky summer, right? Which I agree, they don't look as dominant in their domestic context. But just watching that final, like, it was the best final, I think, of any major region, just because of how smart in terms of like, if you're a macro nerd and you like watching like global comps executed really well. Like, actually this is a nightmare group for Suning, because like TL love globals, G2 love globals, and I think that that's like really kind of hard for Suning to deal with in terms of like vision flank and stuff like that. So this is a rough group actually for Suning. I still have them getting out second. I don't know about you, but mostly this is
I have
because
Yeah, I was gonna say I have G21 Suning too, but I actually won't be surprised if TL gets
yeah,
out. I
it's
think it's
like
really going to depend on if Suning can get their early tempo and really push in, like in the jungle especially. I feel like that can, like, depending on how well they're able to close that out, that can kind of collapse TL from the inside. We saw it happen to them in play-ins actually against INTZ.
mhm.
When they tried that Lilia composition, it did not work. Um, so I think like that is the win condition for Suning against TL. But you're right. Now that I'm thinking about it more and more, this is like, even though I have them in second, this is a really rough group for Suning just based on playstyle matchup.
Yeah, I think it's like I'm almost convincing myself that it's good for TL, but then I think like the jungle matchup is difficult for Roxa for sure. Like that's the way to beat TL. Their lanes aren't going to be like able to fully support Roxa, I think, and they might not pick for lane matchups. Like they're the team that first blinded Twitch Rakan. I guess they picked Twitch into Ashe, but Rakan was blind. So they're not necessarily going to be picking to support lanes to support Roxa. So that's a situation where I can see him getting run over because like Ben also we mentioned Ben's abusable champ pool. I think Roxa has one as well, for
Mhm.
sure. Like the Lee Sin first pick was obviously to deny Shadow, but I just think that that's like a very poignant first pick in a matchup between Broxa and Shadow in general, right? It's like whichever jungle gets the Lee Sin is probably going to have a big advantage, just in terms of pool availability. So that's something that I can definitely see be a win con for Sunni against them. So I think that that's like it's an interesting group for those reasons. So let's move on to Group B here. So I think this group is pretty. I mean, people don't really want to talk about this group because it seems like okay, Damwon and JDG get out. I think that that's a
Mhm.
fair assessment to have, but I also think that like Rogue is like a unique team within the context of this group because both Damwon and JD are more like you would say they're more solo lane centric, but JD doesn't really play for solo lanes, right? They play for their jungle. It's such a weird team because like most of the teams you can identify a lane that the team plays to, but with JDG you just absolutely can't. It's just the jungle. I think JDG
Yeah.
and Fnatic are kind of unique in that regard. Um,
Which makes, I mean, it makes sense given the way that their mid laners play, and or
yeah,
like certain obvious champ pool issues with both of those mid laners.
and then Damwon has just very heavy topside focus, right? So Uh, Rogue is kind of unique in the sense that I can see this team like picking Draven and then just trying to steamroll bot and maybe choosing a win off that. Um,
That's not a bad
Somewhere,
strategy for them in this group, actually,
yeah,
because
I think it's
like
pretty good.
Loken, like I think, like I'll preface this by saying I think Loken has had a career year, but I
Mhm.
also think this has been an insanely good meta for him, where he hasn't had to go on a lot of these laning AD carries where you're expecting them to take like really strong trades in bot. Because I feel like that's where in the past Loken has kind of found himself at a disadvantage against other LPL AD carries that are a lot more aggressive. They're more willing to play like duelists or hyper carries, and are more comfortable on them than Lucan is. But I will say, all year it's been a really good meta for him, and he's performed like above and beyond my expectations, to be honest. So I'm happy for him on that. But again, like JDG do not play through bot side.
Yeah,
They play through Kanavi. And by that I mean you got plays for Kanavi too. Like it's
yeah.
not like a thing where uh um Damwon. Well, actually, I'll say Showmaker plays for himself, but then he kind of also plays for Canyon. It's just not in the same way.
It's really interesting to me because I would say that there are good mid laners in this tournament, but there isn't really a team that plays really hard for mid lane. I would say the team in terms of like mid jungle trades, I would say the
Mhm.
exception to that is just G2. It's the only one. The rest of them, it's like okay, the mid is playing for himself, kind of, and their mid jungle synergy isn't necessarily there.
Or it's reverse, where
Mhm.
the resources go to the jungler rather than
Yeah.
the mid laner.
So it's interesting because I actually think I also another thing in Rogue's favor is I think Larssen is the best mid in this group. That's maybe a controversial
Okay.
statement since people are
Tank.
really high on
I
Showmaker.
would say Showmaker is better. But I think with Showmaker, you're always talking about, and like if you remember, I had this issue with Chovy before too, until this year actually, or actually I'll say like until Worlds last year, where he obviously was given a lot of favorable laning matchups, and he was relied on to win a 1v1, and he was really good at that. But he seemed to not necessarily understand a lot of things regarding map awareness and vision and communicating with his jungler and that kind of thing. And I think he's really grown exponentially as a player. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I see Showmaker as a similar player where I'm slowly watching him start to figure some of that stuff out in real time across especially the back half of summer. So I hope that he continues to improve on that, because I feel like again I'm really hypercritical of mid laners when they are just so 1v1 focused, I guess, and maybe that's a bias that I have as an analyst. Actually, not maybe. It's definitely bias I have as an analyst. But I mean, I think Showmaker is still I would say the best mid in the group. I think the weird thing about Damwon is that they're actually, now that I'm thinking more and more about it, they're very similar to JDG, but instead of Kanavi, it's
Canyon.
Nuguri and
Or
Canyon.
yeah,
Like,
Nuguri primarily,
I mean,
right?
I would say Nuguri still primarily, because even though Canyon is a carry, like, and it opens him up to do a lot of things in the jungle, which is why he's looked like so good, right? I mean, he is good anyway, but when he's given those resources, he looks even better. But then he typically will transfer those topside, whereas Kanavi will kind of keep them, and Zoom, they'll rely on him to basically hold his own in literally any matchup, which he typically performs that role very admirably.
Zoom is the
Uh,
best survive side carry top in the world. It's actually such an interesting matchup because Nuguri is going to be like playing the lane. I mean, both will play the lane aggro, but he's just going to play the lane with like a lot of top jungle 2v2s, right? And then Zoom, I think, is just used to kind of like outplaying those situations. So I think that that's a pretty interesting matchup. I guess for me, like going back to the mid lane point just really briefly, it's like this. You have Showmaker and Larssen as like potential standout mids. Rest in peace, toothpaste. But um
Poor toothpaste.
and Tank. Oh my gosh, I can't believe Tank has risen from the dead to play in PCS. But I
I
think
forgot. I forgot about Tank until Xander was like, "Did you know that Tank is in PCS?" And I was like, "Wait, that Tank?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, okay."
but I think the big thing about Larssen and is him and Inspire, like he'll have like a favorable wave state, and there won't be pressure from jungle or supports to pressure the situation and like create a really big advantage for him for that. But then when he gets into team fights, like this guy can navigate situations so well. It's actually crazy. Like he sees like every angle, and I think because I don't like think Showmaker and Canyon are like super on the same page. I don't think that they're gonna punish Larssen where he's punishable. So that's why I think like within the context of this group, Larssen is just too good. And then, but I think that this is a team that can play mid to bot and then actually do surprisingly well, despite the fact that they're in a group full of Titans. So that's like for them definitely a way forward. Uh, and then Damwon, I don't know. I'm assuming they've kind of gotten over some of the stage fright or some of the choking that they did last Worlds, which is definitely there. I think their solo laners are a lot more experienced, so you're actually able to see the transfer of pressure more. But Canyon is just like for me, I thought last year Canyon was like the best player on the team, and I thought Canyon was like a better jungler than Tarzan, and he's actually just so good this year.
Yeah.
I think he's better than Kanavi because I think that if there are angles where for example, in plans, my mind was just blown by how many like misplayed ganks were made and how the jungle wasn't punished by counter jungling because that's like the easiest way to get a huge lead. I feel like Canyon will do it way more than Kanavi. Like I think you think of Kanavi as this like guy who counter jungles who's like getting his big lead for himself, but there are so many times he just like full clears his own jungle and he's not doing anything with his pressure early. So I actually see like Canyon getting more inches out of that matchup. So for me, it's like Damwon have can play well. If Damwon play well around Canyon, then that's like their best way to win. Because I don't think Inspired is super insane. I don't know anything about River at all. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I don't. So I'll say this. I talked to, because I remember when I found out that Kongwei and Uniboy were going to play for this team, and I was like, oh, like, I actually really like them, so I'm kind of happy. No offense to River and Tank. Talking to a few people in the PCS, they did say that they probably will play in a really similar way,
mhm.
where they'll still play through jungle mid, and it will be about facilitating River to carry. And then we already know about how insanely good Kai Wing is, and everything that he can do. I would say, and I don't think this is like a sweeping general statement, that Kai Wing is the best player on this team, um,
I mean,
in my
this
opinion.
this group has insane
Uh,
supports. So,
yeah. And so I think like so a lot of people are already counting Rogue and PSG out. You covered Rogue. I'll talk a little bit about PSG
mhm,
only because uh people did say that they'll play in a really similar fashion, right? So we'll probably see some pretty similar compositions out of them. And it's really going to be about how well, because again, I have not seen much of River or Tank outside of the few matches I
mhm,
watched of PSG's qualification. But I think the most important thing for PSG is to really unlock Kai Wing, because if he can affect mid, if he can transfer any sort of pressure like from ganking mid and bot side river control to the rest of the team, that will be insane. He also can roam topside if they want to swap priority for Rift Herald. I'm not going to say that PSG Talon's priority was always on point, but I think they were definitely one of the better of the play-in teams in terms of recognizing where they wanted to apply pressure. A lot of play-in games. I know we were kind of ranting about this to each other a little bit, but we saw a lot of like swapping away from tempo.
mhm.
And and I think that's one thing we don't have to worry about with any of these teams, or not any of them, but like it's not something we have to worry about as much with this group, right? So they know where they want to play through. And the big thing for PSG is going to be really unlocking Kai Wing, in my opinion. With Rogue, I did want to bring up, only because I know that people are going to bring it up, the top side.
Mhm. Oh gosh, yeah. I do think both PSG and Rogue have this problem, kind of, but Rogue
Yes.
to more of an extent, probably. I also think Inspired, like if River is gonna perform on the level of Kongyue, I think Inspired is really outclassed. So that's a concern for sure. I know a lot of people are high on Inspired, but I just watch him be like on the wrong side of the map so many times. Um, Misplay like a lot of different situations. I don't know. I think it's a little bit unfortunate for that. But Finn, man, I don't know. I think there's just like a really big laning problem for him where he just fundamentally doesn't understand certain matchups. Uh, I don't think it will be pretty, unfortunately, but we'll see how it goes. Also, the thing with like, we haven't talked about mid game macro very much outside of talking about suiting and flanks, but I think, for example, like PSG and plans did something really weird, which was like really basic level macro, but that seemed high level for playing teams. But they kind of like botched it in the sense that they would consistently be like pushing out the opposite side of the map to the objective that they wanted before rotating for that objective. So teams responded to that really poorly. Like for example, they would push out topside and then rotate to the dragon. Teams responded to that really poorly because they would just like 1.5 minutes early back, go bottom, and then set up that particular back, go bottom. But then, you know, PSG would be pushing out topside, so someone would be sent to respond to that wave, and then PSG would be able to retake. But obviously, the response to that is just, you know, send a person top and send people bottom at the same time
Mm-hmm.
to take the vision. Make sure you can't get pushed out in terms of tempo on one side of the map, because what PSG are doing by not sending people to initially contest the dragon is that they're losing out on first setup, so they're always going to be reliant on having like a tank that can face check somewhere, or always
Mm-hmm.
playing like a 5v5 team to that extent. So I think that that's really abusable against teams that like know what they're doing and with more carry oriented tops that can play like multiple lanes at once. So like Damwon, JD, not Rogue. Um, but, so I think that that's a big issue for them. And then for Rogue, in terms of mid game macro, it's very much like they always play two lanes, and they're always looking for the same 5v5. So like PSG is. So I think if Rogue can get like a significant enough advantage that they can push those 5v5s in their favor without getting picked off by Camille, having their AD get picked off by Camille or something, then this can be like a tournament where Hansama and Vander look really, really good, you know, as a 2v2, and just rotate those resources into that, and then have Larssen popping off and finding like the perfect Orianna shockwave, whatever, then like that's like a very narrow win count for them. But you know, it is there.
Yeah. Who do you have as first out of this group, out of curiosity?
Oh yeah, actually that's a good question because I see so many people putting down one, but I actually have JD. I think they are really reliant on Kenyan. I do think Kenyan outclasses Kanavi, but I also think that this team is just very good at, you know, safely pushing lanes and not necessarily screwing up. And then it's like their mid game macro is where I see them do well. I think there are two teams in this tournament, like G2 and JD, that will trade really obvious objectives for tempo, like every single time. Those are the two teams at this tournament that will do that, and this is why like I think I rate them really highly based on that. Maybe they suffer a bit mechanically in certain matchups, but like JD is the only team in the LPL that I will see like completely give Rift. Obviously some teams give Rift because they're playing for bot turret, but then like not give Rift to play for bot turret, but give Rift to send their jungle and mid into the bot side of the map and look to pick off their top laner as he's like rotating down in the swap, right? Like they do so many like smart little things like that. And obviously people are going to be watching the final of the LPL and think about how both JD and TES played, but there were like moments of brilliance in terms of rotations in those games that I think people dismissed just because they were like unconventional or fucking weird. But
yeah, I mean, everyone's attitude towards JG is really interesting to me because I feel like because they don't have a star that people have been hyping up, like Kanavi, yes, but even then, like if you talk to people who watch the LPL, they'll be talking about Kanavi, but they'll also be talking about Zoom. And JDG has earned the weird title this year that like I feel like one team always gets, where it's like it's not the one player, it's the team, which means that they're obviously bad and they look really shaky and all this other stuff. And I will say that JDG play a style that is like does have some pretty obvious visual like trades and weaknesses, and I think that's why like people sometimes underestimate them a little bit. I still have Damwon first because I think that JDG are also the type of team who will drop more single games. And like, you know how, okay, so you started this conversation on Twitter about like the best of five meme, like better in a best of five. And I have to say that LGD are the one LPL team that I will definitively say are not better in a best of five, actually. Sure. They're going to play exactly the same as they will in a single game. But JDG will adapt and develop over a best of five, and I can see them dropping more single games than Damwon. Whereas, like, if we were talking about a best of five versus JDG and Damwon, I'd actually be more worried about Damwon's ability to adapt than JDG's, if that makes sense. So that anyway, that's my long explanation for why I have Damwon 1, JDG 2.
It's actually really interesting because watching LCK teams, particularly Damwon, it feels like they are just fighting every objective fight. You know, it's like really strange. They've become the meme that LPL that they used to look down on LPL for, right? It's actually what they've become. Whereas like JD, I think is playing like slightly more nuanced League of Legends, and you know, I've always been bit in the ass, usually by LPL teams, for predicting teams with better macro to win. You know, but I think here it's here it definitely just makes sense to me because it's like it's not like Zoom is bad. Yugao is not as good as Showmaker for sure, but he has champions where he is a top tier mid laner on, right? And I think at
Mhm.
this point he has enough that you can't just ban him out in one rotation, so he probably will get to one of them, you know? Uh,
Well, even if you're trying, I feel like there are enough things that you could put him on that he is just like baseline level okay,
mhm.
and then you'd be sacrificing so much more for the rest of
Right.
JDG, which is an incredibly dangerous way to approach this team.
Like they get their favorite pick comp champions, right? In exchange. Or they get
Yeah.
like Ornn, GP, um, carry jungle picks like Graves, Nidalee. So like there's a lot you have to give up for it, and I don't think his pool is like that limited. He can go like LeBlanc, Zoe, I think his aura is okay. Um Syndra is decent, like stuff like that. I think he can perform as a top tier mid laner on a decent amount of champions. So I don't think it's
Mhm.
like that's the meme of he is a one trick is no longer there because I feel like he's like slowly ramped up his champion pool every split by one tricking a champion, you know? It's kind of funny, but
The theory of toothpaste.
the toothpaste theory. But yeah, I definitely can see them on. I don't know though, man. I guess like them one do win a lot of single games, but I think that if they like I feel like they don't know how to not fight early fights. So if they aren't getting like these types of more solo and focused drafts that allow them to take these kind of like fights and skirmishes, I think it's not guaranteed for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on Group B?
No, that's it for me.
Okay. Group C. This one
A
is
group that everyone is. This is a banger. This
see,
group.
everyone is like really interested in this group, but I'm just looking at this like Genji get out. Uh don't really think any of the teams in this group are gonna win worlds or make the final. So I don't care. Uh
This is so like what was I was talking to someone else about this the other day and they're uh like Longsheng because like the theory of LGD right is that Longsheng just has to play at like a baseline like laning level where he doesn't go over aggressive and take a trade that he like cannot win because sometimes that happens. Um but then I'm looking at the other top laners in this group and it's such a weird group
group.
for top side because you have Rascal, you have Bwipo, and you could make the argument that Broken Blade is probably like one of if not the strongest top in this group in terms of like just general laning, but I mean that's obviously like an incredibly sweeping, audacious statement. This is a very weird group for the top side of the map
I think
specifically.
Weepo's like laning fundamental understanding isn't bad. Like it's pretty good. It's pretty solid.
No, I think it's fine. I think the problem is then for Bwipo it becomes and this could actually be in Fnatic's favor to
And
be
Rascal
honest.
as well.
It's not a bad thing.
Like honestly, most of these like all these top laners, I don't think of them as like insane. I think of them, including Broken Blade, I think of them as like solid. You know,
Yeah,
um,
baseline level okay.
uh,
Well,
a lot of them have like a little strange eccentricities for sure. Um,
yeah, I'm trying to explain because, like, I think Whippo looks so insane in certain matchups, and but then it depends on like what champions he's on, and often he'll pick some weird stuff for like for what I'm assuming is team comp. Either that or it's just stuff he is comfortable on and wants to play.
so
Um,
I think Fnatic are like scuffed Jingdong, except
actually, that's not a bad assessment.
they play
It's
more
actually
for
really not a bad assessment.
they play more for bot than top, I think.
Yeah.
And they're really reliant on Hillsong. I think JD, like we didn't talk about Lumao, we did say all the sports are good, but JD are actually really reliant on Lumao. Like you see games where this guy's like just 3 levels down because he's running all over the map. And I think what Fnatic are good at is if you make a wave management mistake in bot lane, right, where you're like slow pushing at a bad time or trying to freeze, when there's like basically when your top is pushed up and you're trying to freeze bottom or something like that, like Hillsong will make you pay for it in terms of coordination like that. So it's like and then self-made is really really strong and aggressive. I think this may be a situation where Nemesis is actually just outclassed by everyone in this group,
Yeah,
including Bjergsen.
BDD, Shea, Bjergsen, yeah.
I feel like this might be the first tournament where Bjergsen outclasses the mid from Europe and he's on his team in his group. So like I think Nemesis mechanically is just really slow when he plays. And doesn't really exert pressure in lane and doesn't call his jungle to fix wave states. So but at the same time he's like just pushes sometimes and self-made invades. I think sometimes Fnatic pick really bad jungle champions for that, like Gragas. Like enemy team lines Shen, I'm gonna pick Gragas instead of a champion that actually like clears super fast and can punish Shen for not being able to clear anything but Gromp and just leaving. Uh, so I think it's yeah. I will say that Fnatic's win con is basically just like self-made gets really far ahead, and like Hillsong has a lot of roaming agency. I don't think it's worth saving counterpick for support, so I think you can punish Fnatic by picking counterpick support, really punishing their bot lane. Like I don't think they have a chance against Gen G for that reason. And then LGG is just a mess. So like LGD's bot lane is like hanging on for dear life and hoping the enemy team doesn't know how to lane, so they can pick Ezreal and scale. And then TSM is I'm not like super high on their laning, so I feel like Gen G is the only team that will like punish that eccentricity of Fnatic well. And so I'm really kind of leaning towards Gen G Fnatic, but I see like those because I see those as being like Fnatic's win conditions. I don't know.
I think Gen G.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say Gen G are really interesting to me only because I feel like we've talked about the general meta of the tournament, which has been a lot more solo lane focused and a lot more like carry or counter jungle focused. But with Gen G specifically, I think it was Raz I was talking to about this, where he made a joke that RNG was the team that tricked every other team in the world to thinking it was a bot-centric meta when it wasn't, until they couldn't get away with it. And whether you disagree with that or not, I feel like Gen G are the next iteration of that, right? Where they're not, like, even though I will say BDD, I think he is a very, very strong mid laner. I don't think they're going to play around him in the same way that you would consider like a solo lane focused team, like a Damwon, a G2. G2 is definitely the best example of this. Like BDD is not going to be that player, right? Even with his like really good team fighting abilities and like skirmishing abilities, they're not going to play around him in the same way as a mid. They are going to really focus bot side. And I think that is a very interesting team to have just generally at this tournament. And I actually think that the way that Gen G like know how they want to play and execute it is pretty solid in spite of the fact that it's not like I would say the dominant meta right now, like the dominant meta game or way to play. And I actually think they're better than DRX, despite the fact that they lost to them. So, I also have Gen G. This is a long way of saying I also have Gen G getting out of this group because I think they'll honestly, especially for a single game group stage, they'll just continue to focus and play their own style, and they're really good at executing on that. And I feel like this team works really well together in terms of how they want to play through bot and through ruler and also BDD. Klid has kind of taken, like when we looked at him previously when he was in China, I think he had more of a like he's not like Kanavi, but I think he had more of like a Kanavi style role, right? Where on this team it's a lot more about facilitating bot. It's a lot more about holding mid as a control point through BVD, especially on all the control mages that he can play. And that is a really dangerous team for, I think, every team in this group, actually, especially LGD. Like, I was never of the opinion that LGD were going to come close to winning Worlds, especially given the way they qualified here. I know everyone's been comparing them to 2015 LGD. I would say the actual correct comparison is to 2015 IG in terms of, if you look at how they, not in terms of playstyle, but in terms of how they qualified and how they came to be here, and the shakiness of their win conditions.
Mm-hmm.
They did play a lot worse in play-ins than I expected. Still, like, even with that caveat, I'll throw that out there. But yeah, unless we see a significant improvement from their bot lane, I do not see them advancing out of this group, especially against, like, I think Gen G is gonna roll them in both their matches.
So I think we said Fnatic has scuffed JDG. I feel like Rogue has scuffed Genji. So like that's kind of the situation. I think Genji probably will just play. I've seen BDD like blow. I think it was against Afrika. He like blew Ori's flash level 1. Had like a really punishing wave state because Ori didn't crash when he saw like the enemy jungle, and that was his window. And then backs with like a really big advantage, and then ends up just giving up like almost 2 full waves to help his bot lane. Even though he's basically could be the win condition that game, like was in such a good position, he's like giving it up and letting Fly back into the game just to help his bot lane. I've also seen him do like really crazy stuff, like knocked back for like 10 full minutes and still get a double kill top because he's like taking like really flipping a risk and they have to contest Herald or something. So I don't know. He's like a really interesting guy. I think he is a good player for sure, but he gets away with a lot of weird stuff. And doesn't get punished for giving waves to help his bot lane or doing anything like that. So, yeah, I don't know. BDD is really interesting to me, for sure. Like he's someone I'm gonna watch during this series or during this group. But I think like that's like probably for me is if Genji are winning, they probably are like crushing bot lane and maybe I think maybe just putting more resources into BDD I think is like a good if they start to have trouble. I think that's like a good approach, like counter approach is to start like allowing BDD to carry with like optimal lane states, you know. Yeah, LGD, their win condition for me is basically just like Sia is ahead. You know, that's the only way they're gonna win. If she is like hard
difference,
if she is just like hard stomping, that's the only way they win because I think Peanut is boosted, Longsheng is really hit or miss, and then bot lane is a disaster. Also, if the enemy bot lane can't lane, that's a good one. But since like Fnatic and Genji will both pressure bot, I think have better like laning than the other ones, then they could be TSM, right? But that's like kind of where I am. Like my biggest struggle in predicting this group is LGD or TSM in third and fourth, but that doesn't matter because who cares? Both of those teams are still eliminated. I think we haven't talked a lot about TSM, which how can we have a show and not talk about TSM? How do you think TSM get out of this group, Emily?
I mean, I honestly feel like they're looking at, so I said about the thing about Genji, right? About how they're going to become the new RNG, where they're just the team that plays so bot lane focused. They have such a good star bot laner that that they'll be able to play and get away with playing that way, even in a solo lane focused meta. I actually would request that TSM consider a similar approach, but I also think that Double Lift and Biofrost are going to have to, who I'm presuming is Biofrost playing since he came back in and looked better than Treats did with the team, in my opinion. Even though people are really ripping into him, actually. Can I just bring that up? Like, I don't know why Biofrost is getting so much hate for in playoffs. I was really confused at that. Maybe people were like super attached to treats or something. I
I
don't have a
don't
problem with either of
think
these players, by the way. I
I
was
don't
just
think
very
they're
confused at
yeah. I don't think
the
their
vitriol.
played particularly well. Like that's why I'm down on them.
No, they didn't. But I think they have the like the problem is you look at them and you're like, okay, you are capable of playing
I
well.
don't think
And
they
I also
are.
don't I think they
I
are.
think they
Against
miss they I think
LGD,
they fundamentally miss like yeah, but that's like that doesn't get them out of groups. Congrats, you won LGD. You beat LGD.
yeah,
Like good
that's true.
job. Like I think they fundamentally like misplay too many main lane matchups. Uh, I just like don't think that they're playing like trades well. I don't know. Like it's not good. And then
I feel like the weird thing is that they're not going to want to focus topside, despite the fact that, and I will say this about TSM, even when
they
it
need
was
to
Darda,
focus topside.
but also with Spica is that they've like consistently tried to focus on improving their topside 2v2s.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that they have at least been trying that, and I think Spica, I know people were also super down on him. I think he's improved pretty well. Obviously, part of that is also because of how much Bjergsen does for him. But I think the team can be pretty happy with how Spica has fit into what TSM wants him to do, but also B just generally how he's improved individually since about mid-summer when he was having I would say probably the worst games of his career in like early summer, early to midsummer, before the team kind of turned stuff around. Um, yeah, I don't know. I It's weird because when I think about Bjergsen, right? I almost think of him in kind of a similar role to BDD, where as much as we
Yeah.
talk about Bjergsen as like he's so good, he's 1v9ing this team, blah, blah, blah. Whether or not you think that's true, if it is true, he's not doing it by, like really flashy solo lane 1v1 plays. Like he's doing it through control, he's doing it through giving up resources, a lot of resources actually, to the rest of his team. And then also making a few highlight plays. But, I mean, for TSM, it's so contingent on certain parts of the team having improved through scrim and practice in China since their finals.
I think they need ultra comfort to do well. So like getting a game of Natalie or Nectin or something like that. Maybe a Zilean comp that will just like
Do you think teams will
surprise.
ban the Zilean?
I think that they can get wins in this group by teams not banning Zilean. I think that even if you feel like you can deal with Bjergsen, Zilean, and lane or whatever, uh, you're just not used to playing against Zilean comps because other teams don't play them or
Yeah.
globally. And they're like really kind of unique, right?
Well, you know who did play Zilean? I'm 99% sure it was BDD actually. Let me
There
like
you
triple
go.
check that, but I totally remember him playing it.
G2 has played Zilean comps as well because that was like the only way that when Caps was
Yeah.
AD that they could survive, get Caps to like not end every team fight was to play Zilean basically. But so
Yeah,
there might be some
he won against
experience.
Kingzone with
There might be some experience with Zilean in this group, right? So maybe there's that. I think like their mid jungle 2v2 is still poor. So but I think that's true of Fnatic as well. Actually, the only team that I think has decent like mid jungle 2v2 priority is LGD actually. So like
I don't disagree, but I just think
Sia
it's funny.
I've seen Sia like fundamentally misplay the lane matchup just so that he can create a situation where they can fight 2v2. Like he was playing TF versus Silas and he pulls the wave in range versus melee. And then Peanut shows up, and they didn't even have a winning 2v2, but he just wanted to force it anyway. I was like, what are you doing, man? So I think that's like a good thing for TSM is that they can just like kind of play mid to play mid, and not get punished for that. Let us move on to Group D, where I actually think Group D is really interesting because it's like, okay, TES should 6-0, and if they don't, then maybe there's some issues there. But other than that, I think that Like, it really could just be anyone getting out in second, right?
Yeah. We have two, I will say, like, so we have FlyQuest, who is a team that we've seen in LCS kind of come up with not necessarily like counter strategies, but really take into consideration how their opponents are going to play and adjust accordingly, like as much as they could, what they do. We have DRX, who let's just say they draft some pretty weird stuff. Like everyone, and this isn't to say that they haven't been called out for it, because I know the LCK broadcast has called them out for it as well. There's also we do have to bring up, or I feel like I have to bring up the fact that the only reason why I'm a little bit low on Dift right now is because he actually is injured, which is unfortunate. Like it's just really unfortunate timing because he, I think he obviously has the capability and has shown not just in previous years but this year that he is a lot better than his current form. So that just kind of sucks all around that he's dealing with injuries going into Worlds that are not. It's not like Nuguri where he had a collapse lung and that's obviously serious, but he had surgery, it was fixed, and it doesn't affect his like Deft actually has I believe not only wrist issues but back issues similar to what Pawn had, which sucks. It probably makes sitting for him really uncomfortable. But that is another reason why I have to consider DRX's current form as even below like what they were able to execute earlier this year. And then I love UOL. I think they're like, and I hate to say this because I feel like it's been part of their like hashtag brand for so long, is like, oh, UOL just pick some wacky shit and they win and it's hilarious, and like I feel like that's actually writing off how this team has chosen and executed their compositions, regardless of whether they're playing something like the Ori bot or the Swain bot, or they're going for their Twitch comps. I think that the way that they approach the game around gadgets picks is pretty interesting. And it definitely has the capability to catch teams by surprise when they have to deal with it. This group is, yeah, like I do kind of want to put TES aside because if they don't do really well in this group, and again, I think LPL teams are really used to dropping single games. So I don't think they'll 6-0 the group. I think TES will lose at least one game just because I never have faith in LPL teams to not drop a game in groups. They typically tend to, I don't want to say it's like not take things as seriously, but the way you see, and TES is just as
the way
guilty
they
of
play the
this
game
as
is
other
really
teams.
volatile. Like
Yeah.
the fundamental way most LPL teams approach the game is really, really volatile. So that lends itself to situations where they can drop a game. It's not that they don't take it seriously, it's just that's how they play.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I want to stress that because I feel like whenever I'm like, oh, LPL teams will drop a game, they're like, yeah, because they just play really fast and loose and they don't take it seriously. And I'm like, no, that's not actually the reason. That's why I was including that caveat. Let's start with DRX. Actually, I'm going to start with DRX just because
how did DRX
this
win?
team...
Tell me. I want to know.
Because of what I wanted to say. I actually think they should have lost. I think Gen G should have been in the finals. They had a series where, and I'm not trying to take away anything from Chovy's performance or the subsequent Necromancer Chovy memes that started, which I actually think are hilarious and wonderful. But the series that they did end up winning was the one where there were severe internet issues and they had to go to live patch mid-series, and it ended up being a reverse sweep for them. And Chovy, who I mentioned earlier, is a mid laner that I've really recognized as someone who has grown significantly as a player from someone who really just used to focus 1v1 matchups in mid, to actually using his pressure on the map, transferring it to his teammates, or using his advantages in skirmishes really well, or to cover other lanes. I think Chovy has actually really evolved as a player, so I don't want to take anything away from his performance either. But I think that series in general, I'm kind of surprised that more people aren't talking about it because it was just a really unfortunate circumstance for to have happen to both teams. And if I had to do like a quote unquote power ranking of the Korean teams, I would actually put, despite the fact that they're the second seed, I would put Dragon X third, just because injuries, because of some problems that they've had with their top side. When we're looking at Pioshik is still lacks a lot of experience, and I don't think he is at the very least against both Santorin and Karsa, who I feel like are two junglers that Karsa is pretty predictable, but he knows exactly what he wants to do. Santorin, I think, doesn't get enough credit for how smart he can be at times. I think Pioshik lacks experience. I think a lot of what Chovy does helps him out significantly. And then, yeah, I think the main criticism I've had when ranking DRX so low has been in their bot lane, and I cannot get over the fact that, again, like, I think ideally this DRX team would love to play through bot more than they'd want to play through topside, because whatever people said about Doran replacing Sword and him being like the next great top laner for Griffin, I do not think that has come to fruition, either during his performances with Griffin and also during his performances with DRX. And I think this is a team that, especially with Deft and Keria, would really love to focus bot side. Similar, almost in a similar style to Gen G, despite the fact that I don't think they necessarily always play similarly. I think they'd like to play that style. But then the big question mark is Deft's injuries, and also just the fact that sometimes, and I realize this is a meme, so I don't want to like also bring it up, but I think sometimes they get way too cute in draft and end up drafting some things that are either really easy to itemize against or are really easy for the enemy team to kind of play around, because they get too focused on swapping picks between lanes, that kind of thing. It's one of those, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, because sometimes it costs them a lot, and I don't see them being able to, I don't know. I just see, I mean, it's not, I would apply this to any team in this group, actually. Like, I just see a lot of holes in the way that they want to play.
Just pick Ziggs.
So Chovy can just take over the games on Ziggs.
Oh, no, Ziggs bot. I think.
For Deft.
Yeah, I think that champion can actually just carry from bot, and it's not as like insanely intensive as an AD if his wrists are struggling, etc. And then Unicorns also will prior that, so you're denying a pick. Hooray! Yeah. But yeah, I mean, honestly, this is like kind of a disappointing group from an AD perspective. Outside of Jackie Love, but Jackie Love is used to that, I guess. I think DRX, like, you couch like a lot of things in soft language. You know, DRX managed to win by being forced onto live server. Every time I see Doran play, I just get like really angry about people who were witch hunting Sword so hard, because I just want to scream justice for Sword every time, because I feel like them having Doran would not have improved their play that much. Yeah, he wouldn't maybe be like 80 CS down to the Shy, maybe he'd just be like 60, you know? But it's so, and then obviously their body struggles, and Keria is really weird. I've seen him like get wards, put them all down, back, get more wards, put them all down and back again, like in rapid succession, not staying on the map for longer than it takes him to put the wards down, and then just they aren't contested or defended. It's really weird to watch. And then DRX are one of the biggest perpetrators of they just take every fight, right? I kind of have more leniency on Damwon when I'm talking about that, because I feel like Damwon generally drafts to take every fight. So it's hard for me to really judge them and say if they would do that or not. I think that some exceptions are like some of the top skirmishes and the Genji series that they played in week 8, I think. When I watched it, like they shouldn't have taken some of those top skirmishes for sure. So that's like an alarm bell. But in general, like it's hard to fully blame Damwon for taking fights that aren't favorable for them because they just draft to take fights and usually they're snowballed, so their fights are good. Mm-hmm. But DRX, I really think will just take every fight, whether it's good or bad. So if you just want to draft, like the best way to deal with them, and I think unicorns can even execute this, is draft a level 6 comp, run the dragon at level 6, and then DRX will probably fight you, you know? So that's why I think DRX, they need to just draft a level 6 comp, like 6 is good, stuff like that, because they know that they're going to opt into these fights, so just do it. You know? Go all in, man. Like, pick a tank for Doran. Get Chovy, something that he can 1v9 on, because you guys are gonna need it. I actually lost my mind when people were trying to convince me that Pyosik out-jungled Kennen in the final, in the first 2 games. Because I watched it and it was just like, okay, he's invading against 2 prio lanes on topside and he's winning a smite fight. That is not out-jungle. And then if Kennen actually passed properly after that, he's just like so behind tempo because he can only get 1 camp. Doing shit like that, you know? I don't know. Pyosik, so for me, it's just like, and then Chovy, knowing that he is the most important player, is constantly, for me, like, late to fights. You said that you think he's done really well in terms of transitioning his power to map pressure. Like, I think at Worlds he did that pretty well. But recently in LCK, I'm not seeing it as much. Like, he's constantly late to fights, stuff like that. And I don't know if that's a comms issue or his team being boosted, but yeah, for sure. Just facilitate Chovy, find some way, like, just acknowledge that he is like your sole win condition. Accept it. Yeah. Find a way to make it work, man. That's like how
it was not reverse sweep, by the way. I'm looking at these again, but the point I wanted to make about Chovy is that I think he's a lot better with it on certain champions. Like I know people get really mad for some reason when teams put players like Chovy or Faker on like a Galio or Set, but I actually think, like, obviously yes, it puts more pressure on those players to be able to set up team fights and stuff, but I actually think that some of Chovy's engages on those champions have been really good.
On the other hand, I feel like he's not going to 1v9 on those champs, so
no, and that's like the problem, other side of the coin, right? Is that, like, even if, and again, like, this happened actually several times throughout the year where Chovy would and it would be timed really well. He'd get off like an insane set engage, and then something would happen where the rest of his team would make a mistake, or someone else would be late to the fight, or it would just, it would be like an unfortunate waste, where that was obviously the call and the rest of the team was not with him. I also think this is another team, now that I'm re-looking at the scoreboards and remembering the Damwon series, this is another team that I don't think necessarily used Lilia very well, or like understood what they wanted to do with her, how to make the most of her early pressure. And I think that the reason why I'm pointing it out is because when teams kind of mis-execute with Lilia because she's so strong, like, individually, that I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, she's a trap, and it's like, well, no, she's actually not going to be a trap for some of these main stage teams, right? So you're going to have to deal with her in draft. And I think that when it comes to some of these jungle picks, DRX doesn't really know how to make the most of early jungle advantages, because to your point, they sometimes end up just skirmishing them away if they take fights that they shouldn't, when the rest of the team is like supposed to be scaling.
I don't think any of these teams are Lilia teams in this group.
Was it in this group? No.
Yeah, none of these teams are Lilia teams, so I don't think we'll see. Like, if we do see, I think this is going to be the group where Lilia loses when it's picked. The other ones, like, you have some Lilia players, like some carry jungle. Like, I feel like no team, this group is kind of unique in that none of the teams play around jungle that heavily, right? So this is like a very unique team, like anti-meta group. in that sense. I think.
Yeah, I'd say they're like I know people hate the word facilitator, but I think the junglers in this group are trying to do more for their teams than their teams are trying to, like, for example, if you have Sophom, right, his team is trying to get him to the point where they're pushing out lanes, so he's invading. You have Kanavi, where Yagao is giving his resources to Kanavi. They're letting Kanavi farm up, etc., etc. Like this group is not that type of group, even with Karsa, who I think people sometimes like misidentify as a
Carry
super
jungler,
like
yeah.
farming carry jungler.
No. Karsa's pathing is so bad.
That's not.
It's so
I
bad.
was gonna say.
Just call it what it is.
I said predictable.
It's predictable in a bad way as well. Like, it actually, I lose my mind when I see this guy path towards weak side because he thinks someone is gonna dive his Ezreal Braum. It's like, my god, if they do try to dive your Ezreal Braum, then they just wasted their time, guy. Just don't do it. And then he still is able to farm his camps and not get invaded and not lose them. And it's actually crazy that I have to wait to see Rainbow 7 punish an LPL jungler for doing shit like that. I can't handle it. In order of junglers who I think are playing incorrectly for the meta, Karsa is the biggest defender, then Peanut, then SFM, because SFM will still play like set and then really just like try to skirmish really hard. And then Kanavi plays like most correctly, right? Because jungle is the role where you can get the single greatest advantage just by pathing well, because of how busted camp XP is, you know, and the fact that rubber banding is not here anymore. So yeah, I mean, it's just, for me, it's really frustrating to see this team do that. So it's like their lanes have to do extremely well, for sure. And I think
no team in this group is like that whatsoever.
Yeah, none of the teams are like that. I think you're going to see, like, FlyQuest is also kind of like a mid 1v9 show, right? TS are 3 lanes trying to be a 1v9 show, you know, in the spirit of IG, but I think some of the things they do are slightly less psychotic. Obviously, their primary shot caller is still Jackie Love, so he's kind of like absorbed some IG spirit here. And then I also think mid is like not too in sync with jungle 2v2s, even though it's like he knows very clearly when he should punish his lanes just by when he'll look for trades and stuff like that, but Karsa will be preventing his Ezreal from getting dove because his Ezreal can't handle it on his own or something. I don't know, man. And then, yeah, Unicorns is a team.
I appreciate Unicorns because I appreciate...
I don't think so. Like, the narrative about them is that they just do like whack shit and win, but I think none of their picks are like that crazy. They're just really good picks, and like they just have good answers into the picks that the opponent picks. Like, Ziggs is a good
even
champion.
like
if they're gonna
even
blind set, then Vayne is a good pick.
Yeah, like people are like, oh, they're just like styling on them, and I'm like, no, it's a lane counter. That's literally it. Like, it's just a really smart lane counter.
Early in the season, when people were like trying set Sejuani, it was like, oh, I guess it's a Vayne game, and then we just played like Vayne top, right? Like, that's actually really good there. So
well, and even I agree with the assessment that like I forget who said this on Twitter. I think it was Nasir actually, where he was like, I hope more people realize that you can play quote unquote like off meta stuff like Orianna, like Ziggs bot. Because
that's not even off meta. Like, Ziggs is one of the best ADs.
Picks, those picks are like not bad, and it feels like since traditional AD carries became like, if you have an AD carry player as your bot laner and they're primarily an AD carry player, they're going to want to play AD carry champions probably. They're not going to want to play quote unquote off meta or just like AP carries or any sort of like tank bruiser bot typically. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, but just generally across the board, I think that's what happened when it became clear that traditional AD carries were quote unquote back after the like shift, the massive meta shift that happened. What, a year and a half ago now? Has it been that long? Yeah. Wow. Okay. Time goes by. What is time even?
Yeah, it's...
It feels like it was yesterday. But anyway, my point is that I think unicorns don't get enough credit for how they are drafting and executing. Like, I'm not saying that they don't make mistakes in their execution, but at the very least you can see the fundamentals behind A, why they draft the way they do, and B, how they want to execute what they draft in game.
So I think instead of, for this group, instead of saying like how each team gets out, I'm gonna say how you beat each team, because I think with DRX, just pick for like a level 6 comp and fight around dragons. For TES, use, if you're on red side, use counter pick advantage to get pushing lanes and invade Karsa, because he's gonna do some stupid pathing. Sorry, and end up being vulnerable, and you can actually get a major lead on jungle versus TES doing stuff like that. As long as you're not kind of trolling your lane matchups, which is hard to do, apparently. And then I think versus FlyQuest, deny like Ori's Syndra as like kind of a bare minimum. I think Wild Turtle is someone who doesn't like space well in team fights. So if you have good pick comps, I think that's really strong against how FlyQuest play. And then unicorns just don't have a mid laner that can't play something against blind Kassadin. I mean, I think unicorns drafting is good. I think if you just look at, like, don't get caught up in thinking that they're gonna pick something strange. Just like go for a standard draft. Play to your win conditions, like play normal, and unicorns are fine, I think. So just, yeah, that's kind of my send off on Group D. What do you think?
I have no idea who's gonna get out of this group outside of, like, if TES don't, it will be weird. A collapse on par with 2015.
Yeah.
Because and that's not just because they're like the #1 Chinese team. That's just because of the way they've played all year. I think DRX are slightly worse than people think, and I think FlyQuest are slightly better than people think. And I'll say that because it feels like people are writing off FlyQuest immediately because they're from North America, but then they're propping up DRX because they're from Korea. I think that's the wrong way to go about assessing this group.
Yeah, I mean, I've said since group draw that FlyQuest is the N18 that I feel is most likely to get out of groups. I think talking about TL a bit more and seeing how favorable their group is kind of for them, like, maybe... No, I think my opinion is still the same. Like, I think FlyQuest have an easier time. But... this is going to be a fun world championship, for sure. Looking forward to the video games.
I wanted to go to China.
That's basically it for us on making the rounds. We'll try to keep doing these like between stages like usual. I'm gonna keep trying to do like individual video content, probably more.
What's your content?
Like abridged VOD review focus, like last time, just like really key concepts. I have cool overlays for that too, guys. I'm leveling up my production value slowly, despite the fact that I changed locations halfway through this episode. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you around.